Good morning. As promised, I said I was going to go through some exam practice to help you revise for your respiration test. Now, one of the big things that will come up from now on in your assessments are practical questions. And we call these CORMS questions because that's how you should set out your answer. Okay. Now, the CORMS starts. But essentially, the course stands for, is change, organism, repeat, measure, and the same. Now, that is how I would bullet point a rough plan for your question. Now, you can't prepare for a CORMS question before your test because you never know what the question is going to be on. It's not normally going to be on a practical that you would have done. So you can't say, oh, it's going to be on the practical that we did on investigating respiration for the respirometer. It might not be that. It can be any kind of context because what they are actually assessing here is that you understand what is being assessed in a practical and your practical skills. So what essentially this is you are making your own little practical scenario up, and you are able to identify in that scenario what you're changing, how you're going to change it, what organism you're using, and how you're going to make it essentially a fair test, how you're going to measure it and what you're going to measure, and what you're going to keep the same. So it's essentially understanding your understanding of your independent variable, your control variable, and your dependent variables. Okay, so the best way to do these questions is to literally bullet point right at the top your CORMS, and you can get all that information in the question. So the question that I gave you in your lesson was this one. Okay, which is describe an experiment you could carry out to investigate the effect of exercise on breathing in humans. So right away from that question, I have already got, okay, I'm going to do my change, I'm going to do it in blue. I've already got my independent variable, what I'm changing. I need to look at the effect of exercise, therefore I need to change something about the exercise. What that thing is up to you. So what I've kind of put here is that we could possibly change the type of exercise, we could change the intensity of exercise. You even, if you are at a loss for anything, you could even say one person exercises and one person doesn't. As long as you have something to compare it to written somewhere in your answer, then that will be acceptable. Okay. Then let's do our dependent variables. Easier to do those. We've got what we're changing and what we're measuring. It's so much easier to do the other parts. Okay, let's do the dependent variable in yellow. So investigate the effect of exercise on breathing in humans. Okay, so breathing, so that's our M, so what I'm doing. So we want to know how exercise affects our breathing rate, essentially. Now, there's two ways that we can do this. So remember, when you are doing these, they are looking for what you're changing or what you're measuring, but also how, so that we can actually write a plan. All right, you're actually going to write this out as if it was you were telling someone how to do an experiment. Essentially, you're essentially writing method. Okay, so for measuring the breathing rate, you can do this two ways. So what I've put on here is you can measure the breaths per minute over a set period of time. So remember, that's the second M is for time frame. Okay. Or you can measure the concentration of carbon dioxide produced. Now, if you're going to measure the concentration of carbon dioxide that is produced, you have to tell me how you're going to do that one. So you could use lime water and time, how quickly it takes to change colour. Or remember, we could use hydrogen carbonate indicator because that will give us a better indication of concentration because it's a color change. Okay, but you just have to tell me how you're doing it. Okay, there will be a range of answers on a mark scheme for a CORMS question. So there will be, so for example, when I'm marking this, I've just made up this question so I can make up my own mark scheme. But for you, when you do these kinds of questions, there might be 3 or 4 different bullet points for one thing. Okay, so you can be as creative as you like, as long as see creative, as long as it is feasible. If it's something outlandish, like I would like to, like if we've got a question talking about effects of something on plant growth, and you talk about planting a tree that I'm going to have to wait 25 years for it to actually get to a height I can measure it, that's not feasible. I've got to be able to do it in a lab setting. Okay. So they're my independent and dependent variables already done. So that is probably, so you normally get a mark for each one of these. So that's 3 marks already, because for measure, I have to have 2. So how I'm doing it, and what I'm measuring and how long I'm measuring for, that's the second marking point there. Okay. The repeat one can come in many different ways. So for this one, you can just say, I'm going to repeat this experiment 3 times. As long as you tell me you're going to repeat it, so for accuracy. So you have to tell me a little bit why you're repeating it as well. Okay. I mean, that will be different depending on the practical. So again, if we're going to a plant one, because some of these come up a lot in describe how this will affect the growth of this plant. The plant one, you could say, if you had a plant, you could say, I'm going to repeat this or many times by having 10 seeds or something like that. So it's not always going to repeat this experiment 3 times. So just be careful there. Then you can start talking about the organism. So in this question, they've actually told you that it's in humans. Okay. I have that written there. So I can't say I'm going to investigate the the effect of exercise, and I'm then going to use a dog, something like that. I know none of you will probably say that, but just in case, okay, always look back in the question for what the organism is. Okay, they will always give you a clue, but you need to give me some key points about that organism. You can't just say, I'm going to do it in humans, because they give you that in the question. The whole point of this is you thinking about what will affect the results and the accuracy of the results. So for this question, you might have to say, I am going to use people of the same age, or I'm going to use people of the same fitness level to carry out this investigation, because you know that age and fitness level will have an impact on their breathing rate. So you want to make it a fair test. So all of this is geared towards how you're making this a fair test. Okay. So this is kind of, so it goes hand in hand with your control variables, because I have to consider these things when I'm actually making up a practical. If I'm putting a practical together, I have to consider what we're controlling, what we're keeping the same, how we're going to do that. Okay, so that is one of the things you're going to have to control. If you say you're going to control it here and you get the marks for organism, you can't then use it in the control variables for what you're keeping the same. Okay. Now, what you're keeping the same does depend on what you're changing. So here I've put same intensity of exercise or same type of exercise, but there also are independent variables. Okay, so depending on which one I've put, depends on which one I will try and keep the same. So if I've said I'm going to change the intensity of exercise, then I'm going to need to keep the type of exercise the same. And vice versa, if I say I am going to change the type of exercise, I'm going to have to keep the intensity of that exercise the same. Okay, as much as I can. All right, and then the other, because you put 2 S's here, the other S means that I just need to give another control variable. And even if it's only 5 marks rather than 6, I would still put another control variable just to be on the safe side, just in case you don't get marks for one. Okay. And the other control variable that I've put there is obviously the time of the exercise or the duration of the exercise. So say, for example, I'm carrying out this practical and one of my individuals exercises for 5 minutes, but the other one exercises for 10. That is going to have a massive impact on the results, because they have doubled the time that they are exercising for. Okay. So that is a rough plan for how you would do a CORMS question, but I can't get marks for writing it like this. I can't just leave my answer like that, because when you have a CORMS question, normally what will follow is you must write your answer in full sentences and include experimental details in your answer. Okay. So you have to write this out like you would write an English answer, okay? Now, you don't have to repeat the question. So you don't have to say, to investigate the effect of breathing on or exercise on breathing, you don't have to start your answer like that. You can actually bullet point it as long as your bullet points are in full sentences. So you could bullet point it and go, I would look at changing blah, 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 and then how, and then bullet point the rest of it. But as long as your bullet points are in full sentences, that's fine. If you write it in note form like I have done here, you will not get the marks for it. Okay, so just to be clear on that. So using this information, have a go at writing this as a full sentence. So we've done the planning, or I've done the planning here. Okay, so you put all of that into an answer, and I'm more than happy for you to come and show me that answer at some point before your test next week, Monday, after school, lunchtime, in the morning. I don't mind. Even if you want to email it to me, I am more than happy to give you some feedback on that answer. Okay. Now, the rest of this, I did say that I was going to go through your some exam practice. So I will start with the exam questions that we didn't kind of get to on this lesson. Okay, so essentially you had these exam questions, which were nice and easy. The first one said, for example, an athlete ran as fast as he could until he was exhausted. And then you've got two graphs. You've got a graph that says the concentration of glucose in the blood and the concentration of lactic acid in the blood you've got on the right-hand side, okay? So the question then says lactic acid is made during anaerobic respiration. What does that mean? That's just asking for a definition, okay? Occurring without oxygen. The evidence from figure 1 that the athlete respired anaerobically during the run. So you have to say from here the evidence, and this is where we're looking, okay? Because glucose is used in both types of respiration. So I can't just say, oh, the glucose decreased, because that's not necessarily evidence for anaerobic respiration specifically, okay? I need to look at my second graph here, and essentially my lactic acid has increased at the end compared to at the start, and therefore that is my evidence for anaerobic respiration, because lactic acid is the only product in anaerobic respiration, okay? And then you had this graph, and this was your question. So it said person 1 was able to run much faster than person 2, use information from figure above, which is actually below, and use your own knowledge to explain why. Okay, so you have two graphs here. Okay, these are a little bit more complicated, and if I'm honest, you're probably going to get graphs that look more like this than graphs that look like this. Okay, because they like to confuse you. So your own knowledge, okay, is coming from respiration. Okay, that's what all of this is linking back to respiration. Okay, I will give you a hint. In biology, there are two things that every single question can link back to: enzymes and respiration. Okay, so if in doubt, put one or the other. And actually, respiration is reliant on enzymes. It's an enzyme controlled reaction. So even respiration questions come back to enzymes. So your graphs, you've got two. Now I'm going to have to explain one of them. So you've got one that says heart rate in beats per minute. Okay, so that's the person's heart rate. And then you have the second graph, which is stroke volume. Now, if you do PE, you might have covered stroke volume. I don't know, because I don't know what you've done in PE so far. But stroke volume essentially is the volume of blood that is pumped out of the heart each beat. Okay, so that's how much blood is actually forced out around the body every time your heart beats. That's what your stroke volume is. Okay, so let me just write that here. How much blood is pumped around the body each beat? Sorry, I can't read my handwriting. So at the bottom you've got time. So you've got the same x-axis on both of these graphs. So it's over time, and you have a grayed out section here. Okay, where the person is exercising. Okay, So it might be best to highlight this to make it easier to see, because everything looks the same when they're shades of grey. Okay, so that is what the graph is showing you. So we're looking at rest and at exercise. Okay, and it says person one, which is this person here. I'm not going to highlight everything purple, otherwise you're not going to know the difference. Okay, so person one was able to run much faster than person two. Okay, use this information and your own knowledge to explain why. Okay, now you have to use both graphs. So what you can see from the graph is that person one, the heart rate, again, much like the graph that we looked at in lesson and we talked about. Okay, person one has a much lower heart rate to start with than person two, but it increases. Look how much person one's heart rate increases compared to person two. So person's one heart rate gets up to about 160, whereas person two's heart rate only gets up to about 148-ish. Okay, so person two's heart rate doesn't reach the same height as person one's. Okay, and then it gradually decreases after exercise is finished. Okay, and it doesn't get back to resting heart rate because we haven't got the graph that far in. Okay, but it starts to decrease much faster than person one's. The stroke volume, if you have a look at this, the stroke volume is massively higher to start with. So this person one, okay, has a stroke volume of around 52 centimeters cubed every beat. That's quite a lot when you look at it for the heart rate. Okay, so I can calculate how much blood is actually pumped out, okay, per minute by multiplying these two things together. Okay, and that's technically how you calculate cardiac output. So that's a head start on our next topic, that is. Okay, but this person is pumping out more blood during their exercise compared to person two. So that's the information that I can get from this graph. Okay, so this person's heart rate has increased, and this person one, is sending more blood to the body, okay, and to the lungs, because if you're thinking about it, your lungs are in your body. But when we start looking at the cardiac cycle and how blood is pumped around the body, blood goes to the lungs first, then it will go to the body. Okay, but this is asking you to use this information to explain why person one was able to run much faster than person two. So here I can say that person one sends more blood to the muscles, body, or lungs. Any one of those is acceptable. You can see that there is more blood. Okay, so I'm using the evidence from the graph, and then I'm going to explain it. Okay, so using the evidence from the graph and explaining it is where the marks are coming from here. Okay, the person one sends more blood to the body. That means they are getting more oxygen and more glucose for respiration. Okay, so that is how I am going to get the marks, right? So I'm carrying out more respiration, therefore releasing more energy. Okay, that's 4 marks. I've got some information from my graph, 1 mark. Then I've explained it. The explained bit is the rest of the 3 marks. Okay, so you get a mark for telling me that there's more oxygen, and then there's a separate marking point for more glucose, because those are the 2 things that are required for aerobic respiration to happen. And we are going to assume it doesn't say anaerobic respiration, okay? But we are going to assume that in this instance, we are looking at aerobic respiration, okay? Always assume it's aerobic unless you are told otherwise, okay? So, because I've got the reactants, I've got more of the reactants, I will therefore be able to carry out that reaction faster. Okay, so I'll be able to carry out that reaction. You have to name the reaction, which is respiration. Therefore, more energy will be released, and that is how person one can run faster than person two. Okay, person one can run much faster because they have more energy. Okay. So that's that 4 mark question, okay? Always, if you've got a data question, have a point of what your data is from using the information, and then have explanations, okay? Point and explain, point and explain, point and explain, okay? And that is it for my recording. If you would like me to record anything else, or if you aren't sure on something, please come and see me before your test. I'm more than happy to record a little video going through anything that you have missed or still not sure on. Other people might also need it too. Okay.